Hydrangea flowers are large round clusters of small individual flowers and could be challenging for a new watercolor artist. Today we're painting a hydrangea bush. With the bush, we're taking a step back so we do not have to be so focused on the individual flowers. All we really need to accomplish is the impression of the hydrangea clusters. My goal is to simplify the process for you. We begin with cerulean blue. We do not want the color to be too dark. We will not paint the entire cluster. With small dabbing strokes, apply some blue to the bottom of each cluster. Start in the darkest flowers first, on the bottom and the right side of the bush, where the clusters are in shadow. As the color fades on your brush, work your way up the bush. I like to use every bit of paint on my brush before reloading. And when you first load your brush, you know that it's always got the darkest color. Try not to paint just one solid shape in each cluster. Let your brush bounce and dab bits of color to give the impression of multiple individual flowers. Go back over the clusters with a second coat of the blue with a slightly stronger color. Next, we will paint in all the green leaves so that we can see the difference between the cluster of flowers, the leaves, and the spaces in between. Use a light green color to fill each leaf. We'll come back later to add some darker values and add details to them, but right now we just need them to be just distinguished from the flowers and the spaces. Even I missed some clusters when painting the blue, so after the leaves were done, I saw, oops, I had missed some clusters and had to go back and fill them in. We just want to get them painted to help us see what's going on in the painting so we can see what's what, because it's easy to get confused in a bush like this. Now it is time to add some real depth to the painting with Prussian blue. We want a very dark, rich blue. Make sure your brush is loaded with dark color. Carefully pick out the edge of the porch. You want a nice hard line there. Observe how I apply the dark color up under the porch and then fade it as it comes down. We wash and dry slightly with one dip into the water and dab your rag before coming back to the paper. That removes some of the color from your brush. Grab just the bottom edge of the dark color, pulling it down. Do this a few times to fade the color as it comes down to the grassy area. Do not go back over the darkest area. Reload the dark color to pick out the line forming the dark shadow of the underside of the porch. I like to hint at the continuing line of the bottom of the porch with some dark, deep spaces peeking through the clusters and leaves. Do the same for the bottom edge of the stairs. It should also have some dark, deep spaces showing through. The underside of the bush will also have some shadows. Just copy the shape of the leaves and clusters that they make under the bush. Remember to keep your color very dark on your brush. You may need to switch to a smaller brush to do the tiny deep spaces in between and among the flower clusters and leaves. If it's not a cluster and not a leaf, it's a space. So paint it very dark. This dark value really gives depth to the whole bush. The spaces should all be irregularly shaped, meaning not all the same shape. And they should be randomly spaced. They could be under a leaf, under a cluster. I am using a synthetic brush that holds a sharp point so I can control the tiny details of these tiny little spaces. This is where those little tiny details make a difference. Where one leaf hangs over top of another, you can also add some dark blue under the underside of the top leaf, which casts a shadow on the leaf underneath. Add a shadow right up under the overhang of the boards on the porch and under each step. Where it touches the boards, it needs to be a hard line at the darkest point. The bottom side of that shadow needs to be quickly faded to a lighter blue with a soft edge. You may be asking, why use blue for shadows? Well, blue is a cool color. Shadows are not in the light, so therefore they are cool. Blue is also prettier than adding black. The dark blue is an undertone. We will come back later to add another color over top of it. Now we add the local color, or actual color of the porch and stair steps. Mix a little bit of brilliant red with burnt sienna to make a brown. I like to use a flat brush when painting architectural objects such as buildings and steps like these. The flat brush helps me to make straight edges. You can also use the corners of the brush to get into some tight spaces and corners. Use medium yellow for the very few yellow buds that are in the bush. Going back to the permanent light green, paint and a 1-inch flat wash brush, cover the grass area. Keep the color light. We'll come back and add some darker values when we make the grass texture. For now, just a flat wash will do. Using a script brush or a liner brush, form some grassy strokes where the blue shadow meets the grass and at the base of the stairs. For the background, behind the stairs, I wanted a pale green to indicate distance with a less intense color. I mixed green with yellow and thinned it with water. Bright colors need to be at the forefront of the page. Colors tend to fade back in the distance. I used burnt sienna over the blue shadow under the stairs. Burnt sienna is close to an orange. An orange is the opposite of blue on the color wheel. So when mixed, they create a brownish color, a very neutral color. I'm using a 1/2-inch flat brush. Use the same color on the wood of the porch and stairs. This gives the wood a much warmer appearance. With a small brush, darken some of those tiny deep spaces among the flowers and leaves with the same color burnt sienna. Dark colors give the illusion of receding back into the depth of the page, whereas light colors, such as white, appears to advance forward. Remember to keep the tops of each cluster white. Keeping the whites will add that extra sparkle to your flowers, where the light catches the blossoms. With a 1-inch flat brush, quickly dab in some medium greens across the grassy area. Then quickly, switching to a liner or a script brush while the green you just applied is still wet, streak in some grassy strokes. The paint will run and drip a bit. I think it's better to work fast and free, allowing whatever happens to happen. Grass should look random, as it does in nature. Do not overwork it, or you will end up with a flat color. We want to see some of the light greens peeking through. You can also mix some blues with your greens to make a darker shade of green. The various color greens help to create the look of grass texture. As my background dried, I felt it had too much yellow in it. We never want to have bright colors in the background. So to neutralize the yellow, I used a slight amount of purple because it's the opposite of yellow on the color wheel. I do not want to use too much or it will gray or muddy the yellow. Just enough to tone the intensity of the yellow, making it a more subdued background. Now to finish out the hydrangea clusters, we add the tiniest touches of violet, sometimes overlaying on parts of the blue and sometimes on the white areas. Do not lose all of the whites. We need those lovely highlights. For our final touch, mix some magenta in with your violet. If your color goes on too strong or too intense, or if you have too much water on the page, you can use a dry brush to absorb the wetness or the extra color. A dry brush is a thirsty brush. A wet brush will put color down. A dry brush will pick up color. You can strengthen the dark values in the flowers that are in shadow with violet. This can be a little bit stronger in color. The color should go on the underside of the clusters that are in the shadows. Make curly strokes with your fine pointed brush to add just a bit more texture to those clusters in the shadows. This would be the ones that are already pretty much blue in the darker areas, the right side of the bush and the underside of the bush. Now for some details on the leaves. Using a darker shade of green, sometimes medium green, sometimes dark green, which is made by mixing some blue with the green, select some leaves to add veins. Paint the center line and make a few hash marks that show the direction of the veins. You do not need to do this to every leaf. Just do enough to tell the story of the hydrangea bush. Painting is finished. Now, sign your name on the lower left or lower right side. Allow a ½ inch breathing space from the side and bottom of the page. That way, if you should decide to frame your painting, your name will not be hidden or partially hidden under the mat board or frame. I hope you enjoyed this watercolor lesson. Let me know how your painting turned out. Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I also offer online art lessons from my website, www.artismyhobby.com. You will see the link below in the description.